Welcome to this afternoon's talk. I am here to introduce to you Gogo Ekhaya Esima. Do pretty good there. And Gogo was our keynote last year. And I have told all kinds of people about you because you have such a unique story and you tell it so eloquently. She is an initiated sangoma traditional healer in the Zulu culture of South Africa. She is a certified peer recovery specialist in mental health, a trauma survivor, and a spiritual teacher. Her shamanic journey of healing and recovery is featured in the movie Crazy Wise. Welcome, Gogo.
Greetings. So first, I would just like to greet you by saying Thokoza. And Thokoza is a Zulu word that sangomas use of South Africa. We clap our hands and say Thokoza as a way of greeting you, but not only you, the ancestors that you walk with. And it's a greeting word that says, I greet you in joy. I greet you in a state of, I am here, I am with you. So Thokoza again. So today I would really love to talk about altered states and altered states in shamanism and weaving the spirit into whole person care. So in shamanism, we began to experience these things, freedom, expansion, and growth. And so I want to talk a little bit about a few of those things. So just to give you a little bit of background, my name is Gogo Ekhaya Esima, and I give thanks to all of the divine spirits that walk with me, all of the ancestors. I also give thanks to the spirits of the land and the people that were here before us. I give gratitude for ISPS because I've just felt so inspired today by so many people's willingness to learn and grow, and hearing the comments in the last session was just so inspiring and completely different from my personal experience with psychiatry and psychologists. So I really appreciate you all and thank you for doing the work that you do, coming here to learn and stand in your work in a way that serves humanity. So I also pray that these words go out to the hearts that need to hear them. And I am a traditional healer, a sangoma. Sangomas are traditional healers from Southern Africa. There's still about 200,000 or more sangomas in South Africa. They work in the form of traditional healing, using the herbs, using nature to help heal the communities, using trance, different plant medicines, and mediumship to help see inside the souls of the individual or the person sitting across from the mat. And there are also people in the community that help resolve family issues or even some political issues in the communities. So they have many different roles in South Africa. And still over 60% of the South African population, although Western medicine is very much present, will still go and see a sangoma to consult with the ancestors. How I became a sangoma, I was initially, well, it's kind of a long story and I won't go into all of it. There's a film, Crazy Wise. There's also my talk from last year that you can kind of pull from. But I was in a state of trauma during childhood, and some of these things came up for me during my adult years. and started to come to the surface. And as they came to the surface, they were experienced as what Western medicine would call psychosis. I started to hear voices, internal voices, outside voices telling me to self-harm. I started to see visions that other people didn't see, especially my father, who was deceased about 5 years at that point. And from a child, I always felt like I was, I had these extraordinary experiences, although I wasn't sure that other people were experiencing these things, like being able to see or dream and have things happen after the dreaming. So my spiritual calling came through lived experience. And I went through the whole realm of psychiatric medications and being hospitalized over the years. And then I came into the peer world, which I was able to meet people like me who actually had this idea of recovery, which it was like the first time that I heard about recovery was in the peer setting. And I was really excited. And then one of the ladies of the program, she acknowledged and hired me. So I became a peer counselor and a specialist. And through that journey, I was led to experience pranayama meditation. The organization that I worked for in New York City was Baltic Street, which is a 100% peer-run organization. And the CEO had picked a few people out of the president had picked a few people out of the organization to go experience this pranayama meditation training to help other peers through their own crises and circumstance. And so I went through that process during the training, and I remember sitting on the floor, and it was time for me to actually share and become teacher in that moment. And I felt a really strong presence during that time, and I felt at peace and really just felt at home, like I connected to something. So this really aligned me to pick up a little bit more of back into spirituality, because I had lost that aspect of myself over the years. And I started to look for myself. I started to uncover what was hidden. And I went to a South African traditional healer at some point, Baba Azana Mavuza. She is here on the East Coast in Baltimore, Maryland, and was able to receive my first ancestral divination. And ancestral divination is where certain objects, and it's an oracle system where certain objects are thrown on a mat, and it is our diagnostic tool for the sangoma to see what's happening with the person's being, or see what's going on with the soul of the person sitting in front of the mat. I went to her, and it was actually a Skype session, and she wrote down, I had all these questions written down, and she couldn't read them or anything, but she told me about my life from beginning to where I was presently in that moment without asking me anything but my name and the names of my parents, or the last names of my parents. And I was completely in awe of this diagnostic tool, because she also told me that I wasn't crazy, that I was actually gifted, and that I needed to go under some type of initiation to discover who I was and to go through a process of healing, and then to be of service to other people in the community. And that this gift was an ancestral gift. It was a gift that was passed down in the bloodline, through the bloodline of many lineages long ago. And the children of the ancestors are able to pick up those gifts. So that was pretty much my story of recovery through the peer mental health model, and also obtaining the spiritual path that was so meaningful and resonated with me. So I went through initiation, and I currently do a private practice of healing and peer counseling and spiritual counseling with people in Southern California. So now to get to why I'm here today, I wanted to talk about some of the positives of altered states in shamanic traditions. So these are non-pathological experiences that any of us can tap into either intentionally or unintentionally. There's going to be a lot of storytelling in this talk, so please bear with me. Most of us know through witnessing or through experiencing the dark side or the negative impacts of altered states. And I really just want to beam a light on some of the benefits that we can receive from these states. Last year, I talked about an experience that I had with a peer who was in an extremely altered state. And in this state, at the time, I called it a trance state. I'll briefly go over that story because I want to continue that story. I think this will be helpful for the talk. So I worked in a corporation that served people with SMI, severe mental illness, and I would go into their homes and go to pick them up and take them to their psychiatric appointment and do a peer counseling session with them beforehand. And I went to go pick up a beautiful lady who was actually in one of these states, and during initiation, during my spiritual initiation, there was a long period of time where there was no time that I could actually have physical contact with anyone. So I couldn't touch anyone or make physical contact or sex or anything like that for the whole initiation point. So it's kind of like living like a monk, but in the city. I still wasn't, I had just came out of initiation, so I still wasn't used to this type of touching and exchange of energy. And so while I was in the car with this peer, she was speaking in a different language, an unnotable language to me that I found to be very archaic. And she placed her hand on my shoulder. And at the time, after she did that, I began to feel really, really dizzy. And I was driving in the car, so eventually I got back to the office. And to make a long story short, when I got back to the office, I started to feel really ill. And I actually was at my desk and asked someone else to take over the session. And there was a nurse that was sitting a couple of seats away from me, and she looked over at me and she said, "Gogo, are you okay? You look flush." And I was like, "No." And she was like, "Let me come over and check your blood pressure." So as soon as she did that, she put the cuff on my arm, and I began to start to convulse, and I fell out of the chair. And in that moment, I knew, because of the initiation that I had just went through, what was happening. I knew that I was shifting into the other realms spiritually, and in that moment, although I was very consciously aware of what was happening around me, I was almost like an observer. I was hovered over my body. And they thought I was having a seizure, a grand mal seizure, and the paramedics came and picked me up. And then when I got back to the paramedics' office, and our building at the time didn't have any signs on it, but nobody really knew what it was, just the people who came to attend or have their appointments. So as I get into the ambulance and the doors shut, the paramedic says, "Okay, stop the ruckus. All your levels were fine. You're okay. Why are you pretending?" And I couldn't speak. At this point, I still couldn't speak. I was literally still trying to find my body. And he was like, "Say your name." And he really taunted me the whole way to the emergency room. And in that moment, I am consciously thinking, how can I get out of this? This is a trap, especially because when I got into the emergency room, it wasn't the regular emergency room. They took me to the psychiatric emergency department. And when I arrived, there was a doctor who came out and who expressed that he was frustrated after I was trying to speak and say, I need to go home. And he was like, no, you can't come home. You're visibly filled with anxiety. And I was like, I know my rights and all of these things. And then, we went back and forth for a little bit, and I started to convulse again. And he was like, that's it. I'm giving you Ativan. And he, rushes back to the other room. So they wheel me into the holding space in the emergency room. And at that time, I was told that I had to take off my beads. I had to take off the sacred bands on my wrist, and I was definitely scared. So I called my spiritual teacher at the time and told her what was going on so that she could pray and also hold space for me. And then a Nigerian man, doctor, walked into the room, and speaking about cultural competence and just being able to connect culturally, I looked at him and I thought, okay, he might have an idea. So if I express to him, what's happening, that this is actually a spiritual matter and that it can be resolved, and I just need to go home to do the things that I needed to do. So I was able to get a little bit more calm and get into my body and speak to him. And he was like, you sound very rational. I'm not going to hold you here. You don't need to be here. You don't need to take off your beads. And I was like, okay, thank you. And a couple hours later, I was discharged from the emergency room. And I got home and I was thinking, why in the world would I be placed back in this situation after all of the experiences and the work that I've done and being in psych wards in the past and coming to this place? And I was asking, my inner self and my own ancestors, why this had took place. And first of all, I know that it was a wake-up call to always remember from where I came, and that the struggle is still existing in this day and will continue to exist until we come to some sort of peace around how we work in the mental health field, and in supporting people to heal. And so during that phase, I decided that I needed to really heal from the exchange that took place. So the exchange took place with the peer that I was with, and it was an energetic exchange, so I had to go through many different cleansings. And I had actually, and I'm speaking, I hope you allow me to speak from these shamanic terms today, because I don't know any other way to express them. But I had taken on some energy from the person, and was vulnerable to that in that time. And I needed to cleanse my energy, my spiritual body from that. And so I knew from the tools that I had experienced during initiation what I needed to do. And one of the first things that I did was I used a certain herbal remedy for cleansing the inside and also cleansing the auric spirit. And I drank a lot of this medicine. The ritual is called Palaza. And so in South Africa and in many indigenous cultures, there are purgatory herbs or medicines that we use. And so I was allowed to purge through that. And then after, I decided to go into my own altered state. And I went into, and it was a voluntary altered state. And I began to dance. And I began to do the dances of the ancestors and with the drum beat. And I began to go into a trance state. And as I was going into the trance state, I was able to go into the shadows of the energy that had taken over and really see what it looked like and go in with, and it almost sounds like a dream, but in this vision quest, in this shamanic journey, I was able to go in with the tools and the particular weapons that I used to fight off these entities that were present. And then I also did some other work with other healers at that time to complete that cleansing process that was very important. So when we look at suffering from a spiritual perspective, the mind can sometimes reach out into the other worlds and other realms to seek help. And this happens usually unintentionally. I often share the example of how our souls can be so traumatized or in a state of deep suffering that if you can imagine like a portal in the center of the body, and when our innocence is taken away or there's childhood trauma, that trauma begins to seep into this portal, and the soul or the spirit is not able to function at its highest capacity because of this trauma, because it's so heavy and dense and weighs the energy down. And lots of times, the soul begins to take flight because it's like, you know what, I'm done with this. I can't be in this body. I don't want to be here. And then we experience what some may call soul loss. And this is where pieces of our soul, another shamanic term, but pieces of our soul tend to go into hiding because it's not safe in the body. And so this when the trauma begins to fill up, it also when the spirit or the soul starts to leave the body, then this space becomes vulnerable to other energy, and it can manifest in when we look at it shamanically, it can manifest in hearing detrimental voices or the voices coming through, or being thrown into the underworld where we're seeing darker aspects of things. And so the remedy for this in what modern shamanism would call soul retrieval is taking back the pieces of the soul that has decided to leave, and find out where it's hiding and bring the power back into the individual. And I share this story because I want to talk about some of the examples of other intentional altered states that we use in our healing modality. So entering into a shamanic trance through drumming, through chanting of songs, through singing is one way. Another way is practicing sahaja samadhi, which is a yogic practice. And they would actually say this would be the more authentic state of beingness, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. And then also by the use of plant medicine. And I really won't go into that talk here. But I do want to focus on expansiveness and how in altered states we experience positive expansiveness. And I want to see if you pick up any of correlations to what you might experience when you're seeing clients. So I'd like to just read a passage by Baba Credo Mutwa, who is a high priest sangoma in South Africa. Now what is the power? It comes to you in a strange way. When you dance in a circle, stomping your feet firmly against the ground and kicking your feet. You must kick your feet high and shake every inch of your body. When the dancing reaches its height, a strange spell comes over you. It feels like you are no longer dancing, but you are floating in the air. You are at one with the earth and the sky. You continue to dance, and then a strange thing bursts from the small of your back. A pot full of hot water suddenly jets up from the small of your back between your buttocks, right up your spine to the top of your head, where it explodes into space and seems to float towards the stars. Your vision changes. Your mind suddenly flies. You are covered in sweat, but don't feel any pain as you continue to dance. Sometimes the powerful force of the hidden one, the Mkumu, as it is traditionally called in the Zulu language, will come a second time, and suddenly you will feel a part of you leaving your body, and you will see yourself in the air, helplessly, lying on your back, while the other you dances manically beneath you. You who is lying above the dancing you will float into a region of internal peace. I can't describe it any other way than to say that you feel as though you are one with every animal, tree, river, stream, mountain on earth. You feel united with creation, and when you fall down, you want to get back up again and do it again. But your weak body can no longer hear the strain, so you lie with your face in the sand, gasping hard like a fish on land trying to breathe. And what Baba Kreda Mutwa here is describing going into an altered state through a shamanic dance. So in these expansive states, we can begin to experience how the separation between here and out there becomes boundless. And by utilizing the ingredients of life, which are the elements that we're all made of, earth, the ground upon which our feet touch, air in which you breathe to fuel the dance, water as the sweat pours down your body, and the fire that burns in your heart with the pounding of the drum. It is said by tuning into the drum, your mind can become clear and silent to be able to hear the voices of the other worlds or of the ancestors. So as we know, this Baba Kreda Mutwa, and he was in his initiation time when he had this experience, it wasn't an accident. It was an accidental emergence into this space. It was invited in, and the community of sangomas, of elders, of teachers are all there to hold sacred space and witness your spirit. So there is a saying that's going around by Gabriel Roth that goes, in many shamanic societies, if you came to a medicine person complaining of being disheartened or dispirited or depressed, they would ask you one of 4 questions. When did you stop dancing? When did you stop singing? And when did you stop being enchanted by stories? When did you stop finding comfort in the sweet territory of silence? And I'll add another one. When did you first become disconnected from nature? So I'll go on to read just a little bit more. So one day after dancing nearly to exhaustion, I was ordered by my other teacher, Philipakti, to go into a hut. As I knelt inside the hut, there came what I can only call a strange explosion inside my head. Like a silver fog, a strange and totally inexplicable burst of joy filled me. I didn't know what I had to be happy about. My body was aching with every muscle protesting, but suddenly I was filled with the great joy, a joy that was so intense that I wished I had arms long enough to embrace the whole world. I felt as one. but yet I felt as many. I was one human being, and yet I was many, many more. And suddenly my heart also felt a deep sorrow. I heard people crying from far away. I also heard people, thousands of them, laughing far away. And later, when my teachers, Marina and Philippakti, entered the hut, I crawled to my hands and knees to greet them. And so just noticing in that moment of extreme expansiveness, how instantly the mood changed from this highly elevated joy and happiness and laughter exploding, and then the mood completely shifts because he's also open, his ears are open, as we would say, to hearing the voices of the ancestors crying. So I'm hoping that you're seeing some similarities to what is often pathologized in this story. Baba Kreda Mutu goes on to tell his teacher that he felt stupid joy, that he could run outside and embrace a tree or that cow grazing next to it. One of his teachers said to him, do you know why you're experiencing this? And he said no. And his teacher responded, for the first time, you're experiencing love. And Baba Kreda Mutua then says, but I hear people crying in my ears. What is this about? And his teacher responds, and what you are hearing are the cries of millions of people who tragically died long ago with their lives unfulfilled. And then he goes on to say, well, why do I feel I should embrace everybody? And his teacher replies, because you are everybody. That is what a true sangoma should be. You should feel that you are everyone and anyone. You are a white man, you are a black man, you are a colored man, you are an Indian, you are a priest, you are a thief, you are everything. You have taken the first steps towards becoming one with the land. And through his experience, he was able to shift from just the identity of self to the identity of oneness. And lots of times we will see this, last year I spoke a little bit about grandiosity and these other things of people feeling just really, really extremely connected. And how we look at this as a spiritual sign of awakening. And I know in the panel earlier, Ron was also speaking about how he really he had this urge to shed the old, And so that the initiation process and this dance into the awakening is that really experiencing the connection between everything. So the experience of oneness is a huge part of awakening in an altered state, and can be a really positive if it's held correctly, if it's held by community and by people who understand it. Because here, Baba Kweda Mutua also had people that he could go to and ask these questions and say, hey, what is this? Why am I hearing this voice, these voices? And having some sort of explanation around it that made sense to him. So going on to growth, when we are able to dispel the illusion of the self and others, there is space for growth. We can begin to take responsibility of how we're to bring our energy forth into the world. And these experiences of altered states can be very powerful and transformative. And there's a deep psychological response that allows the person to dissolve limited perspectives in these spaces and limited beliefs during these altered states. Therefore, allowing us to lead in our own experience. So I'll give you an example. So when I was younger, I was also sexually abused, and I as an adult, I entered into one of these shamanic altered states, not with an intention on healing this, because I had done a lot of healing previously around the trauma from the abuse. And so I had a visitation by my father, who was the abuser in my childhood, or one of them. And but first, the spiritual journey took me into the present moment. So as I entered the trance state, I was there and I was able to see myself in a very recent situation that I had interaction with someone else, where I saw myself as the observer of the situation as opposed to being inside of the emotion. And I noticed how much, or spirit led me to notice how much there was a lack of compassion for myself in that situation. And so in this shamanic journey, I was able to go through many other visions started to come forward of places where I could have had a little bit more compassion for myself. And as I moved on and it went further back in my life, and each moment I was able to say, okay, I can have compassion for myself because I was an observer. And I got to the age around 11 years old in this journey, and then that's when my father appeared. And normally, if my father appeared, especially before my spiritual journey, I would be in a complete disarray. But I had done so much work then, I was like, okay, he's here. And as I looked at him, I was taken into his childhood, which I didn't know his story. But through this shamanic journey, I was able to see his childhood and his upbringing and the pain and the trauma and all the things he endured as if it was myself. And in that moment, I was completely in awe, because that was the first time that I was able to have compassion for my father, the abuser. I was able to see him and his life from a whole different perspective, one that there was never a way in this reality that I could reach that. And so this altered state was a space for growth for me, because as I come to understand first compassion for myself, because it begins here, then I was able to have compassion for the one who abused, knowing all of the trauma and all the suffering that he had experienced in his life. And so this led to a deeper level of forgiveness. I used to say all the time, like, I totally forgive, I forgive him, he was human and that's what happened. But it was this intrinsic forgiveness that really changed something within my being that unlocked a powerful healing. And I had a friend that once told me that true healing comes when you're able to say thank you to the abuser, the circumstance, or the situation. Because from that, you see the gift that comes from it. And at the time she said that, I began to cry, because I was like, there's no way that I could ever say thank you to my father. But through this experience, I was able to say thank you. Wow. Because this experience has made me who I am today. And so the energy that I bring into the world becomes more conscious, because now there is space for compassion for my story and our collective stories as victims or abusers or trauma experiencers or people who experience these altered states. So the victim story becomes lessened, and then this warrior energy begins to rise within and all around. And from this experience, I was able to walk, and we are able to walk into our days, our practice, our offices, and meet with the individuals that we work with and lead as an example of an obtainable divine healing journey and recovery. And so this is how I take this into my work. I would also like to talk a little bit about freedom. So we went over expansion, growth, and then there's freedom. And we experience freedom in these forms of altered states. I know also earlier on the panel, the peer, I forget the man's name, but he explained how he went into a different mode and became one of the Star Trek captains. And in these extreme states, we can become the true essence of ourselves. And some of us feel this blissed out experience or this elevation. And even what comes to mind is I think of Adam from the story of Crazy Wise, for those of you who saw the film Crazy Wise. And he's a great example of this because he started with meditation and was completely transformed and was in a sweet state of pleasantness and comfort. But without the support of community, this freedom quickly turned into a threatening isolation for him as he was dismissed from the meditation circle. And what happened was that Adam experienced a loss of exclusiveness. He was in the meditation circle, he changed, and then when they found out about his diagnosis, they told him he couldn't come back to the meditations. And so this loss of inclusiveness is, I feel like this is what happens when we enter into the world of traditional Western medicine. And we become even more isolated sometimes in our own experience. Although there are beautiful, beautiful groups and things being done to help bring community back into the picture. Unlike the story from Baba Kreda Mutwa that I told earlier, where his community supported him and gave us spiritual explanations for his experiences, lots of times with our experiences here, and I know in my own experience, I didn't have an explanation. 5 minutes, okay. So, the ability to explore and shape-shift through these gifts of teachable moments are essential as a pathway to freedom and elevation of the soul. So I have 5 minutes, and I want to move on to a little bit about what we can do for whole person care and bringing in spirituality. I've read somewhere, and I'm not sure what research it came from, but that over 60%, or maybe it's a little less than that, but it was a study done back in the early 2000s where 60% of people diagnosed with schizophrenia feel like it's somehow connected to a spiritual experience. And I'm not sure if you all have heard this in your own practice and sitting across from someone. So a lot of things that we've talked about today has really covered like what I wanted to say in regards to spirituality and whole person care. So I'll briefly go over those and then I'll open up for questions. I feel like that we need providers honoring that spirituality is a key to the human experience, and that is so imperative that it can't be disregarded in whole person care. SAMHSA does that. They have the 8 dimensions of wellness, and spirituality is one of those things. And so because that's my journey, that's what I tend to focus on. And I would love to see where there are these connections, these community connections in place for the people that we serve. When I was hospitalized for one of the last times in New York, I forget the New York Presbyterian Hospital, they had a monk, not just a chaplain, He was a part of the chaplain team, but he was a Buddhist monk that came in. And when I saw this man walk in his robe, in his full garb, I was like, wow. And they were like, on Thursdays, he's going to lead a meditation. He's going to lead a group. And so I'm in the psychiatric ward, and I'm meditating in a room with a monk, which was like so imperative on my healing journey. That was one of the biggest things that I picked up from my hospitalization, was that they offered Tai Chi and they had a monk there. So they offered something that was nourishing to me spiritually, to my soul. And I feel like if we integrate more of these things, if it's not coming from you, because it can come from you, you are healers. You are the people, the medicine people in our modern society, in this Western world. And so there's many things that you can do, and maybe I'll get to talk about a few of those, but I really think that the integration of spirit is so important. In Scotland, they're doing nature prescription program, where they're prescribing nature, you know. And this is a practice that our ancestors have been doing for ages. And it's so beautiful to see us getting back to this. And also integrating practices that help us feel protected and grounded within our own mental health system, I think is really important. So how do we begin to address the challenges of professionals in the mental health field in weaving the soul and spirit into our work? My quick answer is that it's important to become a wisdom seeker. And I feel like all of you are doing that by coming to ISPS and sitting here. You're collecting wisdom and information from each other of how we can grow in our own practice, but also in our own practices, you know, and what the gifts that we're giving to the world, but also the inner work of our own souls, you know, so whatever that looks like to you. And then, you know, we talked about a lot of the art of being present. And for me, being open, the biggest thing that I got from the peer world and also from the shamanic world was being open to sharing a personal story. Our elders and our ancestors and communities, we would come together and share our stories as a tool, a useful tool for people to relate and build trust and grow. And I know that in the Western education system, there's a thin line between that. I think that you're taught that you're not supposed to go so far with people. And I suggest that be erased, that this human capacity that we have for each other, like, you know, if I'm sitting in front of you and I can connect to you, we have a term in South Africa called sawubona. Sawubona is not just, it's a greeting word, but it's not just a greeting word that says hi. It's a greeting word that says, I see you. I am because you are. Because you exist, I also exist. I am a mirror to you, you are also my mirror. What can we teach each other? And I think when we come in our offices or our desk or in front of the mat and are able to do this and share a piece of you and yourself, then it just opens up the space for this tremendous healing to take place, because the other sees that, oh, this is a human being that's truly connecting with me. So just to end, I would like to say that it's important for us as healers to realize that we are all healers in our own right, and that we're tending to the souls of loved ones that have traveled the other realms to find their healing. And it's our job to sometimes take that walk into the realm with them. You know, one foot in this world, one foot in the other world, how they say shamans do, and be able to take that walk and say, okay, I see you, and you know, how can I bring you back to the shoreline or help you come back to the shorelines if that's what they want. Thank you.